In today's video, taking a look at a new poll that just came out from UC Berkeley, and it's really positive news for the Bernie Sanders campaign as their candidate leapfrogs the pack, going into first place with 24% of support. Now, if you're interested in looking at all of the data from this poll, I'll link this article at the bottom of the video description. Now, California, super important to do well in this state in 2020, not just given the fact that California has a ton of pledge delegates up for grabs and by a significant margin, but California moving up their primary date all the way to Super Tuesday. Very consequential to do well in this state and be part of those candidates that do well enough to split up that treasure trove of pledge delegates. So there's some really interesting data here. So Bernie Sanders, he's gaining 5 points from where he was back in September, where he's now in first place at 24% overall. And it is probably a situation where he was able to pull away some of that support from Elizabeth Warren, where she comes in second place in this poll at 22%, but down from 29% where she was in September. Now, on the other side with the moderates and centrists, it seems like a situation where Buttigieg is tapping into that Biden support, where we have Joe Biden receding to third place at 14%, down 6 points from where he was in September, where Pete Buttigieg was able to gain 6 percentage points, up to 12% of support overall from the prior poll. Now, it is also worth noting that Kamala Harris was polled here, and she was able to grab 8% statewide in California, which is actually a really bad poll for her considering she is the senator from the state, but she's dropped out of the race, and it's interesting to see where her second choice of voters would split up among the rest of the candidates. And if you allocate the vote in that sense, Bernie Sanders still leads the pack, but it's a little bit more competitive, where he's at 25%, and Elizabeth Warren logs 24%, followed by Biden, who's able to get over that 15 percentage point threshold up to 17%, and then you have Buttigieg there in fourth place at 13 percentage points. Now, there are some other interesting points of this poll that I want to touch on. So in terms of the individuals that were surveyed who are considering these different candidates, this is where Warren had the most strength, where 58% of respondents said that they were at least considering her to support as a potential top choice, and that's in comparison to 49% who are considering Bernie Sanders. And then the centrists doing a little bit worse in California, which maybe isn't a huge surprise, where we have Buttigieg logging 41% and Joe Biden there at 39%. And these are trends that we've been seeing not just in this particular California poll, but in a lot of national polls and other state-specific polls, where a lot of the time we see Warren has the most people who are considering voting for her, where Sanders is usually right behind her in that sense. But also Sanders supporters tend to be a bit more committed as Sanders being their first choice in relation to Warren. So that is a little bit of a difference that we get between those individuals. But this is also something that we've been seeing from Biden, where earlier on in the process, not only was he doing the best in a lot of these polls in terms of being the first choice, but he was also very commonly the second choice, and a lot of people were considering him. Those numbers for Biden have really fallen off, and that's not a great look for his campaign, even though he still is the leader nationally. When we take a look at all these national polls that we've been getting out, he's been softening in terms of his support as the second choice, or also just the combined overall number of individuals that are considering voting for him. In this poll, he's in fourth place in that instance. These are some weaknesses that we've been seeing from what is the perceived frontrunner at this point in time in terms of that national picture. Now, taking a look at where these California voters pegged these different candidates having their most strength. So with Biden, it came with 29% saying he was the most electable, followed by 28% who said he was the most qualified, but relatively competitive with Sanders, who was second in these two areas at 22 and 24 percentage points, respectively. Now, probably not all that surprising to you guys, Biden did really poorly in the question where they asked who has the sharpest mental abilities, where he was at just 6%. This is where Warren topped the list at 24%, who said she was the sharpest mentally. Now, Sanders, he did his best in leading the pack among those who said that he would bring the right kind of change to Washington. On top of that, he was tops among the question of who shares your values, and then also understanding the problems of people like you, and those numbers were 27 and 28 percentage points. Now I want to go down and take a look at how some of these demographics are breaking up. So With the older age demographic, voters 65 and older, Biden leading the way by 22%, and it's actually really close between Biden, Warren, and Buttigieg, where Warren logged 18% in this category, and Buttigieg was at 17%, but some big shifting around specifically for Warren and Buttigieg, where Warren was at 32% with this older age demographic in September, and losing 14 points among this voter group to 18% of support, whereas Pete Buttigieg was at 7% with this voter demographic in the last poll, gaining 10 points up to 17% of support. Now we see Bernie Sanders hardly registering anything in the way of support among the older voters, something that we see very consistently, but absolutely dominating the youngest age demographic, those 18 to 29, where he was bringing in 46% of the vote. And also with the Sanders campaign, something that they should really be pleased about with their efforts into trying to do well out west and into the southwest is the fact that they're showing a lot of strength with Latino voters. In the state of California, Sanders really doing very well for himself, leading the pack at 32% of support among this demographic, whereas the second place candidate with Latino voters is 13 points behind Sanders, and that is Biden, who's grabbing 19% of that support. So this poll, it was taken in the later portion of the month of November, so pretty relevant to where we currently stand. And the sample size, pretty decent here at nearly 1,700 respondents from California. So again, guys, if you want to take a look at all of this data for yourself from this article, I'll link it down in the video description. I appreciate you stopping by. Consider subscribing to the YouTube channel for more poll analysis and discussions, and I hope to see you guys back here for future videos.